I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There we go. Welcome. We are going to see where we go from here.
Yep.
Miss Judy has graced us with her presence again. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to see all of you. Happy New Year.
Yes, and Merry Christmas to everybody.
I think while Amanda's trying to set this up, we could go ahead and jump into the memo, and then if you're able to make this work, we can. What we've done is, you'll recall at the last meeting on November 21st, we concluded with a visual preference survey to try to get a sense of people's reactions to different type of structures. And Amanda has done a wonderful analysis of the results of that.
Judy,
I'm sorry. Sorry, folks.
That doesn't magnify the
That's
room.
not going to help the room, but
If you'd like to come forward one more seat, ma'am.
I may.
Okay, you can come sit with us if you'd like, all the ways up here.
Do you want to go
Well.
sit with him?
I'd be careful of that one.
That's true. This is for the television and not necessarily for, I've tried to train my voice down for so many years because my
We just
children
recently
complained
saw
about it.
A
That
great product that would work, called Eversound, that would work great in this situation for people who are having trouble hearing.
Yes, that's true. Just to refresh everyone's memory I don't know how many of you were here on November 21st, but we concluded that meeting with a visual preference survey asking people to look at a series of images and respond to them. And my colleague Amanda Berman has done an analysis of the results of that, how people responded. We're going to try to get that up so people can see what the results were. But meanwhile, while we're dealing with technology issues, I think I'm going to go ahead with the board's permission and talk about the other piece of this, which is really what we were asked to do. And just to clarify, the scope that we were asked to provide for the planning board was to review the town's existing Article 23 in the zoning bylaw, which is the over 55 affordable housing bylaw, and make some suggestions, if any, as to perhaps how to make that more effective for addressing the town's senior housing needs. So with that scope in view, and also to suggest some potential changes and perhaps even draft some revisions to the zoning. And so with that in view, I've done what's called a zoning audit, which is sort of a line-by-line critique, if you will, of what the bylaw says and what some of the consequences of the bylaw language might be, and made some suggestions to the board about some things you could do if you want to make that bylaw more effective. So if you want, Peter, I can just start going through that memo now. Is that all right?
If you would, please, yes.
Yes, okay. So one of the things that your existing Article 23 has is a holdover from an old state law that used to say, until a few years back, that elderly housing, other than housing created by a subsidy program, the elderly housing required a minimum of 5 acres of land. And way back, some smart developers and realtors said, "No, I'm not sure that's such a smart idea, because doesn't it sort of defeat the whole purpose of perhaps providing for senior housing near a town center or where there's activities? You wouldn't necessarily want to then require a large lot just to create senior housing." So one of the suggestions I've made, if you want to keep the existing Article 23, but make it a better agent for producing housing, is to say don't require the minimum of 5 acres. You can just easily do away with that. In fact, that is no longer in the state law anyway. That was amended out by the legislature a few years back. So there's a minimum size requirement. You could just do away with that if you want. Another thing that I think is important to point out, and this is where I think it gets hard for small towns like yours to produce senior housing, is that the developers tell us this industry has changed a lot in the last 15 years as people like me have gotten older. What everyone was building in 1995 and 2000, which was this sort of what we call active adult housing, kind of like what you have on Jeanette Way, a single-family or two-family home for someone who's seeking to downsize. That's not so much what's being built anymore, except in a few kind of high-end communities where the market prices are really, really high. We're not seeing much of that anymore. We're seeing a very different product, and it's catering to the fact that the baby boomers who were 55 10 years ago are now 65 and going on 75 and so on. So your bylaw, the way it's written right now, what it's asking for is moderate density homeownership units. That's really what this bylaw is saying. It doesn't say that specifically, but the density you allow, the kind of structures you allow, this bylaw is saying, let's create some home ownership opportunities for seniors, probably people who might own a home in town today, who are looking for a chance to downsize. The density and the building types that you provide for in Article 23 don't really work anymore for where developers of this kind of product are going. People are looking for a higher density. They're looking for the opportunity to create multifamily buildings, preferably multifamily buildings for a couple of reasons. One is that it's just more economical. Another is that it allows the owner of an elderly housing development some flexibility on the inside of the building to be able to say, well, in this wing, we'll have active adult units. Over here, we might have some independent housing for people who need a little more help. On this wing, we're going to have assisted living because we have people who need more help. In other words, to be able to take the space and make it very flexible to meet the needs of seniors as they age. Well, limiting your building types to 1 or 2 family dwellings doesn't get you there. And then you also have, as part of that, a density provision that allows for, I think it's up to 4 times the number of units that could be constructed in a conventional plan if you have some affordable, 25% affordable units. Or no, yours is actually 3, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm saying if you want to keep this building product, the single family or 2 family, I think you need to consider increasing the density that you provide for a developer to make that kind of housing work. Because your market prices are not Winchester, they're not Lexington, they're Littleton. And so in order for someone to make these projects work and provide affordable units, they're going to need more market rate units as what we call a cost offset. So I think you need to look at the density provision. I think that there's probably a way to simplify figuring out just how many units could be built in a conventional plan without any affordable units, just sort of figuring out what the basic density would be. I think there's a way to simplify that. But again, where I'm coming from with all of this is, I think you're asking me to give you some suggestions on ways to be more productive in the creation of senior housing. And if that's the objective, then some of these recommendations may seem fine and some of them may scare you, because what really you're talking about is increasing supply. And if you want to increase supply, you have to build housing. And you have to be able to build it at a density and a configuration that's greater than I think what a lot of is currently in Littleton today. You have an existing requirement in here in your zoning that says you only allow 1 building per lot. And I think that's another piece that you're going to have to take out of this. It's not uncommon at all to have what we call detached condominiums or semi-attached condominiums, where you have a single parcel of land with multiple, if you can almost picture Jeanette Way, not lotted, but just a particular site with multiple buildings on it. There are some management advantages to that kind of approach. It's often what we see in this kind of development, but you can't do that if you say you can only have 1 structure per lot. So being able to just sort of make that go away, not think about it as a subdivision, but certainly require in the construction of roads and so forth as much conformance to your subdivision regulations as you have today, that would be fine. But I think you want to try to pull out of Article 23 big and little things that might impede the usefulness of that bylaw to developers. I think another thing that would make a huge difference in your case is getting rid of the special permit. Right now, you say that you can do over 55 housing under Article 23 with a special permit from the planning board. Well, I don't know how many of you in the room are developers. I'm not, but I've been around for a while, and I can tell you that one of the things developers just really try to avoid if they can is a special permit, because that gives a town board the ability to say no. So taking that away and saying, actually, you can do this, what we call as of right, if you meet a series of requirements. If you meet a whole series of performance standards, then you can come to the planning board, and you can either do a subdivision under subdivision control, which is essentially by right, or you could come in with a condominium, single parcel, multiple buildings, and go through site plan review. That removes, or doesn't remove, it significantly reduces the developer's risk. And since so many of these bylaws do require a special permit, if you're the town that says, actually, we're going to remove that permitting hassle, and we're going to make it easier for applicants to do this kind of housing in Littleton because we really want it, to some senior housing developers, that would be a very important statement. So in addition to density, design, building types, and so forth, there's also this idea of how long does it take me to get to a yes, and am I even going to get to a yes if I spend 6 months in front of the planning board? Well, kind of increasing the predictability for the developer is an important asset, I think, in zoning. There's another aspect of this that I think would be worth looking at, and that is your current Article 23 is an classic over 55 housing development that says you have to have a deed restriction. It says anybody who lives in this development each household has to have at least one person who is 55 or over. That's not an uncommon requirement. It does exceed what the federal law says. Federal law says you can have age-restricted housing as long as at least 80% of the units in a development have at least one person who's over 55. So in theory, you could have some units that were not age-restricted. I think one thing you might want to consider is perhaps tilting this bylaw away from the concept of a legally enforceable restriction and toward the idea of age by design. And in the industry, we call that age-oriented or age-targeted. And here's the way it works. When you say you can build an over 55 development in our town, we mean over 55 by design. We don't mean a legal age restriction. So your units have to have a master bedroom on the first floor. You know, all the sort of facilities have to be there. You can have a second floor. You could have a bedroom upstairs. But this unit will be designed for people who are older who don't want to have to deal with stairs. Part of why the industry is going in this direction is that although there's a whole lot of us right now, the next generation behind us, there aren't as many. And there is a concern that we're building an inventory of housing with legal age restrictions for which there will not be enough buyers 25 years from now. So thinking about perhaps shifting towards something that's more of a by design will make housing that's conducive to seniors, that's appropriate for people who are aging, but not necessarily subject the units to a legally enforceable deed restriction so that, you know, I'm 63, so if I bought one of these units in your town and I managed to live here for 30 years, I would know that I wasn't looking for somebody else who's 93 to buy my house, that I would be able to sell it, perhaps to someone who's somewhat younger, who might also want the advantages of a master bedroom on the first floor. But the point is, I haven't constricted the market of potential buyers for the unit that I bought. So that's a big policy shift, board members, but I think it's something that you might want to think about on a going forward basis. There's another issue too. I must sound like I'm picking apart your Article 23. I don't really mean to, but I was
Please
sort
do.
of asked to make suggestions, so I'm just trying to do that.
Please pick it apart. Keep going. You're doing fine.
Your bylaw, like so many, says you have to give us affordable units, and those units have to count on the subsidized housing inventory. I understand why. Any community that's providing an incentive to build something wants to make sure that they can continue to add units to the Chapter 40B subsidized housing inventory so the town doesn't fall below 10%. It's a noble objective. I get it. The problem is it's another aspect of over 55 zoning that has hurt these projects. It is remarkable how difficult it has been in lotteries for affordable units for age-restricted housing to attract enough eligible qualified buyers who could meet both the income and the asset limits to purchase an affordable unit. It has been such a problem that some of you may be aware, some developers of over 55 housing that included an affordability requirement have had to go back to the town boards and say, we can't make this work, can you lift the age restriction? This has been kind of out there. It's been so out there that now, when a Chapter 40B developer wants to do over 55 housing, he or she has to jump through hoops with the subsidizing agencies because they question whether there's enough market to support not the market rate units, but the affordable units. So it's actually become very difficult under Chapter 40B to do age-restricted housing. And so the lesson from that is, even in communities that have this kind of zoning, it's been hard for developers to create the affordable units that will count. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have an affordability restriction, but it may be that you have affordable units that don't actually contribute to the subsidized housing inventory. It's another way to think about it. You know, if you really want the affordability, write your own affordability rules, serve whoever you're trying to serve, but don't bother asking DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, to put the units on the subsidized housing inventory. You might make things a little easier for the developer, and you might get some more units. So it's just something to think about.
But if the end game is to keep the numbers down, if we don't get some numbers attached to it, then we've made it affordable for a guy to build the place, but not so much affordable for the.
Right.
Could we ask for a contribution towards affordable housing?
Well, this is another thing that you could do. This is a type of inclusionary zoning. And inclusionary zoning is zoning that says, we're going to let you build something, and in exchange, you're going to provide us with some affordable units. That's what this is. It's both age-restricted and inclusionary. One of the things you could consider is making it a little easier for someone to build the housing you want, but not subject that particular developer to having to create the units. That you might allow a developer to instead contribute money to a housing trust fund, and the town then controls that fund and is able to use it to buy land for senior housing, to help subsidize senior housing somewhere else in the community, or not senior housing, some other type of affordable housing, but it becomes a way to generate revenue to a housing trust fund that the town can then control. Now, the upside of that is you might get some more senior housing that meets needs. You don't get the affordable units in the project, but you get housing for seniors.
Judy, can I
Yeah.
ask you a question?
Sure.
So what you're suggesting is that it may not be possible for us to get everything in one go here. That
Yep.
we may need to make some trade-offs.
Yep.
You know, we recognize we want senior housing, we recognize we want affordable housing, but there may be some aspects that really are in opposition.
Yeah, yeah, that don't work together.
Right.
That don't work together. And I think this combination of subsidized housing inventory, affordable units, and age restriction, when you start laying all these requirements on development, at some point, it just becomes a big disincentive to a developer to try to build. It's easier to just build market rate housing and be done with it. So I'm trying to suggest that certainly another option would be to allow what's called a payment in lieu. It's a way of saying, I'm going to create housing, I can't put the affordable units in my development, but I'll give you money. Now, you have to have certain systems in place locally to make that work, because you can't just take money and have it sit in the fund. You actually have to have a way to say, we're really going to put that money into the development of some other type of senior housing somewhere in town. But it's plausible, and many towns do it.
Do many towns develop their own properties and put them into senior housing?
Oh, yeah, we have lots of, but towns generally don't develop it. What they'll do is they'll issue a request for developer proposals. They'll make town-owned land available, and they'll spell out in the request for proposals, the RFP, what it is that the town is looking for, and put that out for developers to respond to. And, you know, even when you do that, you have to make sure that you haven't laid so many restrictions in the RFP that you might as well have, you know,
But
you have
in the
difficult
end run,
zoning. and-
who owns the project? The developer owns the
Well,
project, or the
you can
town
do it in
owns the
one of two
project?
ways. You can do it as, well, typically the developer would own the project. You can do it as a ground lease for 99 years, or you can simply convey in fee, and the developer owns the property. But as part of that development agreement, you're basically imposing certain requirements on the deed. So somebody doesn't get to take your land and then go build something else on it, if that helps at all. You actually get tremendous control if you're the owner of the land and you're selling it. The other thing is, you get huge control if you're a source of financing. So that housing trust fund can become very advantageous to a community, because if you're a mortgage lender, you have control that really is even greater than, I have a deed restriction I can enforce. So there are some advantages to the trust fund, but I just want to make it clear that when you do that, you also create some obligations for the town to have a mechanism to invest that money in housing development, to have the expertise to know how to do that. So those are things I think you're going to want to think about, but you would not be the only town that took that approach. It's a policy issue for you. All right. Some other ideas that I talked about in this memo, separate from Article 23, is that I think part of the need here, based on what I've seen in just income and housing cost statistics, really gets to the heart of apartments for seniors, not just home ownership units, but apartments. And if you're trying to address that need, you're not talking about density of 3 or 4 units an acre, you're talking at a much higher density in order to make that work. It's not just the cost of the land, it's operating the housing. You have to have enough critical mass that somebody will manage it, whether it's a housing authority or somebody else. So, I think you have a couple of options here if you want to think about rental housing for seniors. One is to actually create the zoning that would make it possible. Another thing is to say, we're not going to try to deal with that. We'll use Chapter 40B to do that kind of development. The other option is to think about something like accessory apartments, which is a fairly innocuous way for communities to create rental units at a small scale.
There are more illegal accessory apartments in Littleton than there are bowls of cereal every morning.
And there probably are in just about every town I work in,
Right.
So,
But and the nice part about an accessory use apartment is it doesn't affect the layout of the town. Typically, they're already inside a structure.
right.
We can make them fit inside a structure, and therefore, they're available, and the community doesn't really change its appearance.
Yeah.
That being said, in my mind's eye, I see items 6, 7, and 8 all being combined in one unit. Apartments, independent living, and assisted living all being in one complex.
share that.
Oh, you could do that, yeah.
Right, and that's,
Earlier.
right, and that's, I'm wondering, when we go back to looking at, the payment in lieu for a developer to come in and do a 55 and older, and then we develop that trust fund, and then we have town land available, that we can then create this with an RFP.
But you still have to have the zoning to allow it.
Right, well,
I mean, you can't create zoning rights through an RFP. What you can do with an RFP is say, here's the property that's available, this is what we want to have happen to it, and the regulatory tools are available in our zoning, or we're going to create them, but the RFP does not create land use privileges. It simply creates an opportunity to develop.
I'll
So,
wait.
huh?
I know what he's saying. I know you addressed part of that already. But once again,
Yep,
this is the first board that I could tell in the last 20 years that said, let's do something about the elderly. Now, there's a sports program going in right now that's going to be great for our youth. But this is what brought us to here, And to have them not be able to have a nice place to hang out, a nice meal, and someone to hang out with, and that type of thing, and someone to keep an eye on them. I'm one of 8 kids, and when my mother got old, there was always someone she'd kick out of the house, so, and there was always somebody else to
sounds
look
very
after.
familiar, Peter.
All right, so I don't know how many of your children live close. Some of them may be on the other side of the country. Who gets, in your case, your mom got you for a very long time, which was great.
You're talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but there's not a lot of
I
that.
was the nurse of the firstborn.
Yeah, so, it's only fair that the elderly have someone to take care of them if they don't have children. I think a big problem is the way the government turns around and Social Security is a joke to most of these people. They get 1% a year. I know my taxes just went up $1,500 in 1 year. What would if that happened to them? Where are they gonna get on fixed income? Whether they have, a nest egg put away for them when they get even more golden, or their children to have something left over. But where does the government stop taking from them and start doing something for them? And I don't believe that this should be a utopian society for the elderly. Don't get me wrong, you've worked hard, you deserve something, but there has to be some way that the government stops taking from them and allows them to keep a little more of what they have.
And we can be that because we are part of the government. We can change the zoning.
Well,
We
I
need to
think,
get drain the swamp, drain all of it, but I don't know, I don't want to get into that.
I don't want to just promote rental housing, but I will make this comment. It is easier for people to be buffered from the impact of tax increases if they're living in apartments. I mean,
Yeah.
it just is simply easier if there's
With the
rental
lease,
housing.
but if you have rental and your taxes go up and the fuel goes up and you include your rent goes up, you're gonna raise your rent on your tenants because
But it
it's costing
doesn't
them.
hit them the same way that an increase in property taxes does on a single-family home.
You'd hope. Now, the thing with the accessory dwellings, that's the way that a hit can be taken, where, again, two units can help each other out.
Yep, absolutely.
And the way ours reads is you have to be either functionally dependent, which I'd love to see someone read that and give me the definition of it and deny what is, or a blood relative.
Yep.
Those are the two options you have. The other things that are required is, again, you have to have the parking spaces, the septic system to handle it, there are other things in
Special
line.
permit termination clause.
A 3-year period, da-da-da-da-da. It is very restrictive, and really, it's archaic, so that alone will help us. But again, we need to find some way to secure properties now and shortly, and then use these avenues that you said make it desirable for a contractor to come in and apply our wishes. Does that make sense to anybody here?
Well said, Peter.
Woo-hoo!
First time ever.
I did good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so too, buddy.
Trying to have some fun here.
Well, that's good.
So what I need is some direction, I'm here to try to help you prepare some zoning amendments for town meeting, big or small, and I just need to know what you would like me to do.
May I-
Do you want to address it first?
Yeah, man.
Huh?
So, the accessory use apartment in a single or two-family structure to be less restrictive,
Yeah,
no special permit required,
yeah.
no blood relative, not functionally dependent. And it does have, one of the two units would have to be owner
Oh,
occupied.
sure, right.
Outside of that,
Definitely.
And no termination?
no termination. If the house is sold.
That's why you have illegal apartments.
If the house is sold, obviously, the accessory apartment goes with the house, but again, it's only available to the owner and the occupants. And then going back to 6, 7, and 8, or 7, 8, 9, whichever ones, I like the idea of changing the zoning and changing the restrictions so that we can have senior housing with all the amenities from assisted living to independent living to maybe on the same site you have some affordable housing and/or some single-family or two-family homes in the vicinity on the same piece of land. You have a center structure that for the assisted, and then the independent living outside of that.
Right.
That's what I would hope to see, and I would hope that we can rewrite the zoning and get it approved at a town meeting so that we can provide that.
I also, in the same instance, our height restrictions
Yeah.
on certain things. That, obviously, it costs more to go out than it does to go up.
Yep.
If we can, right now, what do we have, 36 feet? Do you remember,
32 for residential district.
is it 32 feet? It's from the median?
Right.
All right, so again, it depends on how you measure it.
Yeah, it does.
And that's 32 feet. I bet you there's a lot of places that don't, you start adding 10, 10, 10 and put a 12-pitch roof on, you're starting to get above the 32 feet, but you know what a 12-pitch roof means? Okay, so, I know you do, because he showed us all those pictures to see what they liked and didn't like, and you have that information. Okay, so let's stick with, what we can do is in, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is, the accessory dwellings, making it more, a density to be changed, the age requirements on.
To be reduced
To be reduced,
or rewritten.
in a fashion that's gonna make it, I think the affordability needs to be addressed also, somehow or another, what is affordable, what isn't, how much money do they have in the bank that they're not, they have too much money in the bank, and
I would limit an affordability requirement. If it's a subsidized housing inventory issue, I would limit it to rental units. Because I think what you're going to find is the developers who know how to do this. Is that your child?
That was adorable.
Always done. That's why I unplugged it for a minute. It's so good.
what was it? I didn't hear.
Picture of her child.
This stuff.
Oh, I missed it. Okay.
The developers who know how to do this, it's just easiest to accommodate affordable units in a rental development. Now, I'm not pushing it, I'm just telling you that's market
Yeah,
reality.
yeah. It goes where it can go. All right. How about if we go over, is there any questions, suggestions that from anybody? Name and address, Mr.?
Keith Bergman, third floor.
Okay, it is. How many feet up are you?
My temporary Littleton quarters, but I just wanted to see if you had a feeling for having payments made, an inclusionary zoning bylaw that resulted in payments being made by the developer in lieu of producing the units. And if so, then what you need to task Judy to do is to give us a first-class operation of how that would work. We don't have a housing trust here. Boxborough has a housing trust. They do, we don't. But, I mean, there are some, and there are plenty of models out there of how you do it, and we've never done it yet. And we haven't used public funds. Those would become public funds, and then they would be used typically for private developments of some kind, either to pay someone to deed restrict units as part of some other thing, or it might be a situation. I'm not aware of any town-owned properties that we could use to help float an RFP development. But in whatever fashion, if we're getting in the business as a town of spending dollars, either the mitigation dollars or the community preservation housing dollars, I think it behooves us to have in place a structure of a housing trust, which does what we want it to do and what works and elsewhere, because we don't have that structure in place now. So if we didn't have it, if you wanted to pursue money and we didn't have that piece of it, then it wouldn't work.
That's absolutely true. I mean, you have to have a special revenue fund anyway. There is a provision in state law to simply adopt a provision of state law that was adopted in 2004, 2005, where you can create a housing trust. That gives you the funding mechanism to segregate.
Can we
the
create
money.
the housing trust as a board or with joint?
Town
board?
meeting.
Town meeting.
That
Town
was
meeting
my
would do it,
question.
so it would be part of a package. If you're talking about bringing zoning amendments to town meeting, or part of the package of affordable housing measures would need to include establishing and empowering a affordable housing trust,
Right.
or else that piece is.
That's right. No, it doesn't work. I
Yeah.
mean,
All right. What?
No, I'm also.
Way out back, sir?
Yes, Michael Zeldin, Low End Street. Just, this is more of a down-in-the-weeds technical question, but in one of your suggestions offered to the planning board to increase the density of housing, I was wondering if you could, very briefly, if it's possible, put together the following. There is, if I'm not mistaken, common sense rules that relate how many septic tanks per unit, how much space, how many bedrooms, and all the rest. There must be a threshold, a practical threshold, where when you go above a certain number of units, whether they're rental units or not, number of people, bedrooms, whatever it is you're counting, where a septic tank is no longer feasible because of the space. If you're going to reduce the amount of space in which you're going to put units, then you're automatically putting a restriction on how you handle waste management.
wastewater, right.
So what I'm interested in is the reason for this question has more to do not with the practical aspect of just how many.
Correlation between the size of the lot and what the lot can actually
More
handle?
importantly, really cut to the chase are these kind of projects candidates for a real sewage system, the type that the town is talking about, for putting in, using around the common, et cetera, et cetera.
Sewer helps, it's not essential.
I'm sorry?
Public sewer helps, it's not essential.
No, and I'm not talking about, I'm interested in Littleton's rules about, and practical rules about waste management and the number of people per piece of property and the limits that septic tanks can handle.
Right, so I'm not on the Board of Health. I do understand a little bit about Title V, but going back to Peter's comment, costs more to go out than go up. The other benefit of going up is you have more land available to put the septic system in. And to treat the affluent
Yes.
coming out of the building from the number of bedrooms,
Right.
if you have more land available, you have more
That's-
ability to treat the
And
affluent.
that is exactly why Chapter 40B developers go up.
And you also gotta remember that the soil on the property that the building is built on designates also just how much you can put back down into the ground.
Determines how big a bleaching area you need, it's like, where's the water gonna go? So,
There's not a thumbprint for each, it's not like a boilerplate, as they used to say it.
They gotta test,
Yeah.
they gotta test the soil.
I will tell you, I think, I understand Mike's comment, but I think one of the things that's important to try to bear in mind is zoning has a purpose, Title V has a purpose, the Wetlands Protection Act has a purpose. Let the Wetlands Protection Act and/or the local wetlands bylaw protect wetlands. Let Title V and/or the Board of Health regulations deal with wastewater, and let zoning do what zoning is supposed to do, which is to balance public and private rights and make sure that the needs of the community are met. No one's going to be able to build anything if they can't satisfy Title V. Doesn't matter what the zoning bylaw says. You could say you could put 200 units an acre, on an acre of land, but if they can't meet Title V, then they can't build it. So the more important thing for zoning to do is to say, what do you want and within what parameters? And let the developers and the engineers go figure out how they're going to make all that work with Title V. And they may not be able to build as much as the zoning would say, because they have to satisfy environmental rules. But developers deal with that all the time.
Very good. Any,
Hi, this is a great conversation. I have to appreciate it, and I thank you very much. My name is Mary Hunt, and I'm Vice Chair of the Council of Aging, and I'm also Chair of the Housing Subcommittee. Now, I came on November 21st and listened to your presentation. I also read your housing production plan of 2014, all 68 pages. I wanted to know what I was talking about, hopefully. And I
read that whole thing, you're about
You're saying.
66 pages ahead of me.
And I read this one today when I got it earlier. So hopefully I say something that makes some sense. That production plan was a very good document. I think you had part.
No, I actually did not. Metropolitan Area Planning Council did that for
Well, whoever did it was a good document, and it's a great starting point. And it had some excellent recommendations in it, which we're addressing right now. And they're really worth some serious consideration for a number of reasons. One, they make sense, most of them. And I don't understand all of them, and I don't claim to understand all of them. They allow for improvements in the zoning laws, and a lot of the zoning laws need some attention, particularly related to senior housing. They're good consideration for development for senior housing, affordable and subsidized housing, which the town is in need of. And I respect the board for looking at these changes and hope that serious consideration comes about. Now, regarding this here document that we just got today, you wrote about, Article 23 is a wonderful article, and it's so confusing and complicated, but you broke it down quite well. But it doesn't make any sense for development of housing at all. So that's something that the planning board really needs to take serious if we're going to really do anything for senior housing. That production plan, as well as the COA's needs assessment, validated that the fastest growing population in this town is 55 and over. So if we don't plan for 55 and over, we're kind of stupid. Because you're not planning for your future, or your future is not gonna benefit me
I'm
because
already
I'll
over
be 6 feet
55.
under.
He's the one, you gotta start pointing at him.
Oh, it's you.
You're not over 55.
Sweetheart, I'm knocking on the other door.
So this is the time to be looking at it. I mean, we're not gonna build this in the next 5 or 10 years,
Well, I think we.
but it's the time to
I think
start.
5 years is if the window isn't open and we're not doing something in 5 years, then I'm afraid that,
So it
Then
really
we're done.
is, we
Then
need to
you're
make
right.
Article 23 a friendly article, and if not a friendly article right now.
you will be next, Gino. When this young lady is done, stop waving at me. Please do. Use a book, not a piece of paper.
Goal number 1 in that production plan was to maintain the subsidized housing inventory. And we're not going to do that with the aging population if we don't do something, even by 2020, which is only 4 years away.
Have you made a little list of these things that you're addressing with us right now? That's your little, your.
Why do you want it?
I know what you do. I would like you to give it to Judy before we leave.
You're going to have it.
And, all right, I
And
appreciate it.
then goal 4 is adopting zoning changes.
Yeah.
And, you know, our subcommittee, along with the Littleton Housing Authority and the general senior community population, we have an idea what we would like for housing. But if articulating it now is almost moot when we can't even think about it, when we can't get anything because zoning's not friendly.
Well, we have the
Well, that's why we're starting this process, because we're trying to change zoning.
And I think that's good.
But we
You
want to know
probably
what
see
the,
my face sitting here every meeting, and you probably say, "What's that lady, please go home." But I wanted to articulate this because it's very important.
I appreciate it.
Well, but you finished that up, Patty, with a statement of what you would like to see in town.
Yes, when I was with the Littleton Housing Authority the other night and talking with just senior citizens and talking with our Council of Aging Board, the seniors that we talked with, they're looking for 2-story apartments. Like that's at Shattuck Street. We've heard that they like the single homes on White Street, but 1 level, not 2 levels, because they don't want to go upstairs. And I can appreciate that. That would make sense. But they need to be affordable, some of them need to be subsidized.
And people like the semi-detached,
Pardon?
the semi-detached, the double.
Yes, and it wouldn't matter if they were attached, you know, in a complex.
Okay, Gino?
I'll be very nice.
Promise?
I will promise.
Okay,
I'll be very polite. I
Thank
concur
you.
with the young lady,
excuse me?
because I'm on the housing authority, she was a guest. I hope someday she might join, because we
Cut
like
to the
her.
chase.
I also was trying to be very nice with you guys. You mentioned about affordable. I say subsidize. We need subsidize. First, we need a piece of property. The lady forgot to mention. The town has to donate a piece of property for the state to subsidize the money that will come to build the housing. And that was not mentioned here yet. So we do have
did
a lot
address
of
that.
elderly, you know what I mean? I mean, they're not here,
Yeah.
but they
No,
probably
we did
watch
address
TV.
it. See, you-
Actually, I did.
She did address it, we
Okay.
addressed it.
But the question, in order to do that, we have to have property, buildable property. If it's not buildable, we'll revert back to the town,
All addressed already. What are
okay?
you
And
doing back there?
I mentioned about 7 acres, so we can build at least 60 or 70 units.
Maybe 300.
It's impossible, because we do have 300
That was a
applications,
joke.
over 300. That's all I have to say. I'll be very polite, but the
Okay.
question is, I wanted to make sure that you people understand, we, not 55 or over, because a lot of people, when they're elderly, they have no money. And also, the income is very limited. They're only on Social Security, very little pension. So they are allowed, and they will be able to afford subsidized housing. I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm not yelling.
Perfect.
Very nice.
Thank you, Gene.
I thank you for the time.
Oh, Michael out back.
Yeah. I've said this before, and I've got to reinforce it. There's a quotation in the housing production document indicating that the the elderly population, which includes me, of Littleton is going to increase in the next several years by, the number is given 35 or more %. I'd like to point out that number is not applicable at all to Littleton and is misinterpreted by the originators, the folks who wrote the housing production, and it appears in other documents from Littleton. Took it from an organization called the Metropolitan Study Group.
Area Planning Council.
They in turn took it without looking at where it came from. It was original study by the Donahue Institute. And if you look at the Donahue original study, that study actually does a projection for the whole region.
Okay.
And the methodology used does not apply to Littleton. There's nothing in that estimate about Littleton. In fact, if you go over the data, it collapses in a heap for Littleton. We could range from 2% to 50%. The honest answer about where Littleton is trending is either up, but we don't know how much, or down. But I'd like to point out that the bulk of the population that's growing in this town at the moment is not the elderly, is actually the group which cuts off between the ages of 50 and 52. It's younger. Now, whether this continues to be a trend, I don't know. But before we move ahead and start doing estimates, we ought to know the numbers we're talking about.
We don't want to build 1,000 units for 50 people.
I'm not sure we need 50 units.
I know, but that was just, the far end of the spectrums to each. But in the same instance, if we turned around and got an age group of Littleton, we'd know, right? If we have 100 people at 5 years old, 600 at 7, 200 at 3, we know what the age group is.
Yeah, that is analysis, yeah, and you have to know a lot more than that. Also, the move in and move out, there's more to it than counting.
You're right, it's not two, it could be 2%, it could be 50, as you said.
We just don't
Well, we
know.
could find that out, correct?
It would take a
You're going to be
special
looking at
project.
different estimates. I mean, Mike is correct. There are actually two sources of estimates. The numbers that the Metropolitan Area Planning Council used in their housing production plan were generated by MAPC, not by the Donahue Institute. The Donahue Institute has their own projections. The two sets of projections are not aligned well. We find in many communities that we work in that the two numbers are in a disconnect. If you don't have growth happening in your I would say not only 55 and over, but 65 and over, if you don't have growth happening in that population, then you're a unique community. And I should ask the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies to come in here and look at Littleton, because you'd probably be the only town in eastern Massachusetts that isn't seeing growth in the senior population. That said, and you've just supported what I'm saying, that you should get away from age-restricted housing and focus more on age-oriented design. Because that way, you've maximized the market potential for that kind of housing, you've reduced the developer's risk, you've created a product that seniors say they want, but you haven't put so many limitations on that housing's marketability that you end up with nothing.
And Judy, if I can follow on with that, if you build housing with stairs and restrictions for people, you cut out a lot of people, disabled people, elderly people, demented people. If you build it, as you suggested, with a master bedroom and a bath on the first floor, that doesn't stop anyone from living there.
Right, right.
Universal design supports everyone, where if you don't think about universal design, if you don't think about having a doorway that's wide enough to get a wheelchair through, does not stop anyone who's skinny from getting through the doorway.
Really what this comes down to is a mix of housing.
Yeah.
That's all this is about,
We
is a
can't
mix
solve
of
it with
housing.
one thing.
You can't meet all of a community's housing needs with one type of housing. Period. That's what this is about. Amanda? Did you want Amanda? He's not remembering your,
I'm terrible with names.
he doesn't remember mine either. Did you want to see the results of the visual preference survey? 'Cause it's
Yes,
kind
and
of
I'd like to know how many people were here for that visual survey the last time. Everybody here was here for that?
interesting.
I'd be interested to see what the taste of Littleton are like.
I was here.
Did you raise your hand?
I did.
Did you? Did you?
No, I didn't.
Were you here last time?
Last time.
Very good.
No surprise.
Could we watch that? Amanda, please?
So,
You ratted me out there, right in
we
front of everybody.
started by showing the results of the survey that where the audience went from very negative, so the far left of the survey, I think it was -3, to over to somewhat negative. So combining those scores is what got the percentage for each image. So we start with the most negative preference from the group of that night, which was image 12. So 69% of the group felt very negative to somewhat negative about this image.
Flat roof and 4 stories.
Yeah.
I gotta keep that to myself later, I'll tell you.
Here's the next image, now we're down to 65% negative.
That's interesting.
58% negative. Also 58. 54% negative. 50% negative.
Did anybody like anything?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, it's interesting. So I first started by looking at the positives, and I started with anything 60% or above I was going to show in this presentation, and I couldn't do that with the negatives. So there was more leaning of the group towards feeling positive about the majority of the images that were shown than negative. So I had to change the criteria, and I said, okay, anything 50% and above for the negative I'll show, to be able to get, otherwise I think I would have only shown 2 images. So,
We're nice.
no, it means your minds are open.
Yeah.
Also 50% negative. Oh, what happened there?
How about 50% means even?
Yeah.
Either way.
Split,
Okay.
split.
And not necessarily, because if you remember, down the middle was a neutral, and I didn't count that neutral in the scoring. So the positive side of it wasn't necessarily 50. There was a percentage likely that was also just neutral about this image. Okay, so now we move on to the images that received the somewhat positive score all the way to the very positive scores, starting off with the most positive.
Can I make a disclaimer? I was a contractor on this project. I actually built that, so.
Oh, good. They like to hear.
You also didn't rat yourself out on the ugly one that was up there earlier though either.
I didn't ever build anything.
So, yeah, this was the image that was, received the most positive scores.
Which one is this?
Riverwalk.
Yeah, Riverwalk.
Thank you.
It's also
I
one of the
like
most
that.
expensive ones too.
That is a net zero positive. Oh.
Here's 85% positive.
Now, is that an attached complex?
Yeah.
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 Let's see the two.
Okay.
77% positive. Also 77%, again attached.
Yeah.
73%, also
That's
attached.
Yeah. But they're too level.
Yeah. A lot of
But remember, we're gonna try, we have to
First
try
floor
and
bedroom.
catch more than one type of
As long as the
fish.
master's on the first floor.
You would have to do that.
As soon as
But
I
if you-
walk in the door, I'm in the first
If you
floor.
limit it all to 1 story, you won't get anything built. You're going to have to provide for a mix. That's how you get anything built, is providing for a mix.
Because, you know, you on the first floor and your daughter, your son, your somebody, or grandson that's old enough to get in there.
Put my husband upstairs.
There's a basement in some of these places too, you know.
73% positive. 69%. 69%. 62.
Oh, that's interesting. That one.
This is
I
very
like that one.
interesting.
Where is that one? Do you know?
I'm trying to remember. We took pictures of some, we stole images of
Did I
some.
take that picture?
I'm sure no, I think I stole that.
It seems like the more institutionalized it gets, the less people in Littleton like it.
Yeah.
The more independent, the more separated, you know, feeling
I
like
think
you're
that's
still a
in Brewster.
homeowner of your
Yeah.
own stuff.
I think that's in Brewster.
Oh, okay.
There was an old lady from Brewster. She had 9 hens and a rooster. Don't know that.
There you go.
62% positive. I'm still
That's surprising.
high.
That's a
Isn't
pretty
this
building.
interesting?
Yeah, but it's not practical unless you've got elevators
Oh,
and
you
all that
would, you would,
stuff.
oh, absolutely, oh yeah, you would have elevator access.
You probably have to
That's probably what that sphere is.
Yes, the elevator, it's the elevator, yeah.
Looks more like a bunch of churches.
That's Weston again, that's.
Yeah, it is Weston.
Now, remember, you also took a bunch of the pictures in the fall that really did make the buildings look all that.
Well, this is another thing I always try to tell people with caveats of visual preference surveys, is that you can have just two pictures of the same building, and one's taken on a great day, and the other's taken on a gray day, and people have a totally different response to the pictures. So we have to be a little bit careful here with these, but,
So we got the gist.
Yeah.
well, you do. There's a roof form, there's a lot of housing under the roof as opposed to height with the roof higher. I mean, so there's a way to sort of mask some upper story by placing it under the roof. People seem very sensitive to that.
Can you go back to that one there you just had there? If this is our favorite one, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Would it look great in Littleton? Yeah, but that's the one that we can't afford, that we want to avoid because of the affordability of it. And, you know, I don't know what the footprint of that place is, what the layout is like. It's easy enough, you can put anything anywhere if you want. But obviously, it has at least a bedroom or two upstairs, which
Yep.
is great. But you got an awful lot of roof line, you got an awful lot of windows, you got a lot of deck area.
Yep.
Every projections in it is
Yeah.
thousands more.
That's right.
So,
But there were plenty of those semi-detached that were high scores too. I mean,
Right
but,
there.
yeah, but again, look at it, it's spread out, a lot of roof line, a lot of windows, a lot of clapboards.
These
There's
are
a
getting
lot of
pricier.
maintenance.
You
Yeah,
should know that. These are getting pricier as the positive response goes up.
But
I know.
oh, absolutely, but as it comes down a little bit, I think we see some stuff that's doable.
it's still, it's gotta be affordable to both the person living in it and the guy building it. That's what's gonna,
Stuff like
Yeah,
this.
that's not bad.
well, that.
And
that's
this
more
is
affordable.
unfortunately just
Yeah.
not a nice day.
Yeah, but that's more affordable. And that's,
I mean,
I
that's
think
just
this
looks like a
and the
regular
next two
house.
images are all,
Well, that's
what we're thinking
Littleton, we
about.
already
Yeah,
have
it is
those
Littleton.
down.
That's
And
nice,
those,
too.
they couldn't sell them as affordable, correct?
why not?
What did,
Those were the additional units out at Reed Lane, so the additional duplexes.
but again, they couldn't sell the original ones, correct?
That's right.
Go ahead.
So I was just gonna say, you were talking about the mix of single-family homes or attached homes intermixed with more apartment style,
Right.
assisted living. So this is one of those. This is the one I believe in Lincoln.
It's Lincoln.
Yeah, and so
that's the
I know
this
this
picture
project
that
well.
you're seeing
Yeah.
is lining the perimeter of the property with these
Smaller scale dwellings.
smaller scale dwellings, and you get into the center of the property and you have more of the big apartment style where some of it is independent living, but still apartment style, and some of it is assisted living or memory care. So it's a very,
So somehow,
what's the term?
Continuing.
Continuing.
But I'll tell you, I actually know a lot about this project because Lincoln has been one of my clients. This project almost went belly up until another developer came in and the zoning was changed to provide for assisted living and nursing care, because the independent, the active adult units alone weren't going anywhere. So it took a mix of housing, and I would tell you that the assisted living structure that's in this project is a multi-story building.
that's what
But it
saved
took
it.
the infusion of capital and the mix of structures to make the whole thing turn around.
And Judy, did it really impact them that they had the underground parking so that you didn't have to have a garage with each unit here? And you didn't have to do the parking with each unit?
I don't know,
That certainly
because
must
they
have
have
improved
some,
their
they have some underground, they have some separate parking structures, it's a mix in that property.
Mhm. But I mean, you don't have to have it with each unit.
Right.
Because the bylaw for us, for example, says that if you had 2 units, you'd have to have 4 parking spaces.
Oh, yeah, well, that's another thing that needs to go. I mean, we don't find that, well, let me say this. Active adult housing is different from
Accessory.
housing for people who are 70. I mean, the whole point in this industry is that it is a changing industry because the age mix is changing. So what makes sense for someone who's 55 is not the same as that which makes sense for someone who's 75. It's providing the mix. So, you know, you might need 2 cars for a household where both people are 55. But you don't need 2 cars for a household where the person is 70. And you certainly don't even need 1 car per unit in an assisted living residence where the national average is a female who's 85 years old. So the whole thing has to make sense for the population.
Okay, where do we stand?
Next steps.
I think I'm hearing you say that you would like me to give you something to consider for an accessory apartment, to fix the accessory apartment bylaw?
Yes.
I think I'm hearing that.
Yep.
Yes.
I would be more than happy to try to take Article 23 and turn it into a mixed senior housing type of bylaw.
Can we call it something else?
Yes, I would suggest, if you want to have inclusionary zoning in here, that you separate it from the senior housing and just have an inclusionary zoning bylaw, but that's up to you guys.
Well, if it comes to town meeting, the chances of getting,
A senior housing bylaw as opposed to inclusionary zoning. Senior
I think we
housing.
could better
Take
shot
them
it.
separately.
Yeah, take them separately, that way you can, and because if we're doing one for seniors,
Yeah.
and you all show up in force, guess what?
We'll
You're
get
gonna
it.
get something.
I didn't say nothing, don't look at me.
I wasn't looking at you,
Can we
there's
get
plenty of pretty women here that
But
I,
the other
you're the
option is,
last in my view.
the other option is to keep the affordable piece in here, but create the ability to pay a fee in lieu and go the route of creating a trust fund.
That's what I was
Which
just gonna
then-
ask, is could we get some advice on the housing
Yep,
trust?
we could do that, and then you begin to create a revenue base to buy the land for the senior housing that really needs a deeper subsidy. So,
And that begins to address the affordable piece, which we've already said, we can't do one thing that addresses everything.
right,
So if we change the zoning, we get the inclusionary, we get the senior housing, then we get the funds.
right.
Yeah, we put all the, and that's, the accessory dwellings, they don't have to be tied into affordable, correct?
They won't count anyway.
Right. Unless somebody signs all that paperwork that I,
It's more complicated than
Then
that.
it's
There's a
worse.
whole
Yeah.
fair marketing thing involved.
so
in
let's
it.
leave that away from it. What could we have a 1 through 5 things, and we now have 3 at least, correct? We have 3 things right now that we're asking to be addressed?
If we get 3 all the way to town meeting floor, we'll be doing fantastic.
All right, but let's have, if you can think of 2 other things that may be, in the far stretch, those,
Put those in the master
What-
plan.
What's next up? Yeah.
yeah, put that as portions of the, parts of the master plan, the changing of some of our requirements, land masses, da-da-da-da-da-da.
Sure, I have no problem with that.
So part of the master plan, these 3 would like to see to go to the town floor. Is, obviously, you're gonna have to get no pinochle on that night, you gotta show up, right?
I'll be there.
God love you. Okay. Any other questions?
I do, Peter.
Okay.
Is this something we can revisit in our next meeting in 30 days or something?
Yes, you can. I mean, that's my concern is, I think we should probably figure out the calendar backing up from town meeting, what needs to happen when, because I don't know like when your warrant closes. I'm sure you told me and I've forgotten already. I bet you did tell me, because we talked about it for the master plan. It's sitting here right now, I have
April
no clue
19th or
why.
something?
Well before that.
But the meeting was May 2nd. Regardless.
Yeah, we'll work that out. We'll figure that out.
Any questions, Maren, you may have for some of this that you can see as,
No, Judy and I have had several conversations about it. I'm feeling very good about it. So.
okay, well,
Fine. I think I kind of know what to do.
All right, that's what
I just wanted direction. I didn't want to kind of go down the path of
all right.
of really reinventing Article 23 without having a sense of where you want to go.
So how many things are you going to address with this feeling you have? 3, 5,
For
7?
For the meeting that you have in February, I can have an accessory apartment bylaw for you to look at. I can have I'm not sure what I'm going to call it yet, but sort of a senior residential campus bylaw that would provide for a mix of housing.
Okay, and 3rd,
What's the third?
a form of, a way of fixing,
Housing.
finding funds for,
The trust.
Okay, see, I was actually thinking of that as part of the
think-
reinvention
I
of
think-
Article 23.
all right, well, I
We
can
want
know
to know how to
that.
we want to know how to establish that.
I see what you mean, right, just the mechanics of setting it up. Sorry, yes, yes.
Amanda wrote that down, look at her writing like a mad
I
woman.
don't know.
Couldn't find it, so I'm using them.
We got all kinds, and we'll throw anything you want.
Here, catch.
Okay,
You got one?
thank you. Thank you, everyone.
You sure that's
Wait,
it? Any other?
Before we leave, everyone leaves, I want to say thank you to everyone for coming again tonight. get your friends, let's keep this going. And we want to set a meeting for the first Thursday of February to follow up.
Yep, that's our, yes,
The 2nd, February 2nd, we have a regular meeting
February
anyways,
2nd, right?
yeah.
I believe, yes. You know, and if you could come to some meetings, even the master plan,
Yeah.
if you don't show up for them, so some of those things, how do we know that that's gonna be part of it,
Yeah.
right? We want the elderly involved with where the town is going, correct? Yeah, no?
Yeah, January 25th. January 25th is,
I'm old,
Seniors.
I can't do what I used to do.
Right.
Mature adults.
You're trying to get something out about the master plan, aren't you?
yes, Peter, January 25th is the open house, the final public forum for the master plan.
Does that have to do with what's on the wall?
Are you going to dedicate the meeting on the 2nd just to this, or are you going to have other things on your
We've got
agenda?
a full
Other
agenda.
things.
Okay.
Time you want.
7:30.
I don't need it.
Well, how about,
Can we come
I
back?
tell you what, if you'd like.
It makes a huge
Mayor,
difference on the road.
Do you come back to town? Do you come in here at all, in the
Oh, I
building?
got it at home anyway.
All right, because otherwise I could have, Mary, could you scan this, or?
She's got it.
She's, all right, she has it. Do you feel lost without it? Would you like it back? Okay.
Patty,
I'm gonna give
if you
this,
send it to me, I'll get it to Meredith so she can get it out to everyone.
this is,
Make it
this young lady
Oh, thank
Email
you.
it to me, I'll get it
had
to
some of
Meredith.
her
I'm going to
thoughts.
scan this and send it to Mara.
Watch out for him, he's mean.
If I
he's not
want one too.
Electronically,
I'll
she can
send
send
you
it
one
to
and
me.
you can
All
see
right,
it.
I read enough of that.
Thank you, that works great.
No, they're two different
Did you
methods.
get,
I know those
Maren
studies
sent out a
very well.
letter, a note late on about,
I know what they did. I
talk
know
to
where
you.
the
Go
source of
somewhere.
funding came from for those two studies.
Guys,
it's a pain in the ass.
You guys,
Peter,
What's
I
that?
know we
Oh,
didn't
the
really have a
plan,
meeting, but
okay,
are we
but just the
adjourned?
Yes,
projections,
all
that
those
may
in
be
favor of
saved out of
adjournment,
it.
say aye.
Different